Okay, so I'll accept the thanks from the organizers to me for allowing me to speak here, because I'm actually pinch hitting for Pinaki, who couldn't be here. Okay, so I did not quite realize that this was a half-an-hour talk, and I have 58 transparencies. So I will just save you the trouble and show you only 57. Okay, so let me start by thanking the people who have funded my research. This is DST and DAE. And this wonderful young graduate student, who is no longer a graduate student, he just finished his PhD. And well, all I can say is that someday I hope to be like him. Okay, so and there have also been contributions from Sudeep Ghosh, who I think may be in the audience. Is there? Okay. Okay. All right. Okay, so I'll give you a background and a somewhat extended background, because this meeting I didn't quite realize, or I felt that this talk may not fit into this meeting because there is no strong correlations in this set of problems. The only common thing is that we are going to talk about fermions. And the main thing that I'm going to talk about is fermions in these things called Rashba gauge potentials. I'll tell you what they are. And somehow I will show you that this actually produce superfluids at high transition temperature with weak interactions and no strong correlations. Okay, and we also have some connections to creating topological states, etc. Okay, so let me just give you an very quick, or let me add to what Antoine had discussed this morning. And one of the most spectacular successes of cold atoms research is this this is a well-known theory from long back. And this is the experimental realization of this in the most spectacular way, I would say. And this is single atom resolution on an optical lattice here from Greiner's group from Harvard. And you can see these very beautiful Mott lobes that were predicted long back. Okay, so this is the power of cold atoms. But cold atoms has difficulties as well. Let me quickly tell you what these difficulties are. One of the key difficulties, particularly as far as fermions are concerned, is that it's very hard to get into quantum degenerate and strongly interacting regimes. Okay, so this is called the cooling problem. Then there's the trap, and anytime you want to extract some thermodynamic, say, critical exponent or something like that, then you have to do something with this trap, and you have to work with the fact that there's a trap and take care of it. Then there's the issue of how do you do measurements and how do you infer that you have realized a state and so on. And we would certainly like to do things like transport. Antoine will talk about what their approach to doing transport in a certain class of cold atom systems. But generically, what you would like to do is you would like to apply electromagnetic fields and then see their response. But the sad part is that atoms are neutral and they don't directly couple to any electric or magnetic field directly. Right? So you have to somehow fake the magnetic field. So you have to actually generate conditions in which the atoms believe that they are moving in an electromagnetic field. Okay? And this is the idea of synthetic gauge fields. Okay. Now, when I heard this the first time several years back, I thought this was just science fiction, so I ignored it for a while until this set of experiments came up. So synthetic gauge fields are very real. Okay? And this is the work from Ian Spielman's group in NIST. And what I'm showing you here, this is a BEC of rubidium, and something has been done by coupling the internal states of the atoms to make a situation where the atom sends a magnetic field. So as you increase the magnetic field, you will pop in vortices into the system, and you can actually, by tuning a knob in the laboratory, by changing the magnetic field, you can actually pop in as many number of vortices as you want. Okay, so there's no rotation or any such thing. This is actual magnetic field that the atom is seeing, that the condensate is seeing, and you see these vortices. Okay, so this is very real stuff. And what is interesting is that you can also generate non-abelian gauge fields, right? Not just abelian gauge fields like what I showed you there. And why would you do this? For example, if you take bosons would condense in the k equal to 0 state in the usual continuum. But once you have this kind of non-abelian gauge fields, what the bosons do is they actually condense into some kind of density wave state. Okay. So these things have also been verified in experiments, and again from Spielman's group. Okay, so the question is what happens to fermions, and that's what I'm going to discuss. And before that, I will tell you how one generates these non-abelian gauge fields very quickly. Okay, So this is a atomic system or an atom with say, let's say n plus 1 levels. I have labeled them from 0 to n. And what you do is you just couple them with n lasers, okay? And you can show that if this is the nature of the coupling, you can show that the low energy, or you can diagonalize the Hamiltonian and rearrange the levels in this fashion. These two levels split out, and I have a set of degenerate, m degenerate set of levels. M is equal to n minus 1, okay? So two less than what we had here, okay? Now, the important thing to remember is that the laser has a phase which is space dependent, because it has this e to the I k dot r. So what happens is, this manifold at the origin, let's say, let me label them by this psi alpha, and the manifold here are not the same, and they are actually related by a SUM unitary rotation, right, this way. And the point is, if I'm in this one state here, if I create a particle in the one state there, everything is done adiabatically, or all these variations are done slowly enough that the oneness of the particle will remain as I go from here to here. But the state, the one state here is something, and the one state there is something else, right? So as this moves in this manifold, it will actually pick up some non-abelian phase, if you like, and that is this gauge potential, and this is the idea that has been around for a long time. So the mechanical momentum of this object will actually change from the mechanical momentum that it had, the canonical momentum, minus the gauge potential, which now is a SUM generator, okay? So this is how the gauge potentials generate. Okay, so that's the background. Now let me pose the question, what I'm going to discuss. Okay, so to pose the question, I have to give you some background of interacting fermions in 3 spatial dimensions. Part of this was sort of alluded to by Antoine in Stock this morning. Okay, so suppose I take spin half fermions, and let's say there is a contact singlet attraction, and this is what he said you can actually tune by a Feshbach resonance. Okay. So the first thing we know from elementary quantum mechanics is that if I have 2 particles in 3 spatial dimensions which are attracting each other, then I need a critical strength of the attractive interaction to form a bound state. They will not form a bound state for arbitrary small attraction because there's a lot of phase space there, okay? And that result can be actually put into this kind of an RG picture in the following way. If V is the strength of the attractive interaction, if V is less than some critical value, all the physics is governed by this free fixed point. If V is greater than some critical value, it is governed by this, there's a bound state, and it's governed by the energy of that bound state, okay? So that's this picture, and this point where V is minus 1 physically corresponds to where the scattering length between the particles goes to infinity, and this was also mentioned this morning, okay? So this is what this is the so-called resonant fixed point. So this is the, if I solve the 2-body problem, this is what happens. There's no bound state here. There's a bound state when the scattering length becomes positive, and the bound state energy goes as 1 over scattering length squared. Okay, what happens at a finite, when I have a finite density of particles? So if I have a small negative scattering length, that is on the right side here, I have a BCS ground state with very large pairs. It's a superfluid, and as I increase this, the scattering length and go to positive and go increase the attraction and go to positive scattering length, I evolve to a state where the chemical potential of the system is no longer roughly EF. It starts to approach the energy set by the binding energy of the two particle problem. So it becomes, the system evolves to a collection of tightly bound bosons of these fermions. The fermions form bosons, and they Bose condense. So the result of that is that for a small negative scattering length, I have an exponentially small transition temperature, and for a small positive scattering length, I have the BEC temperature of essentially, the bosonic fermions, the bosonic fermion pairs. Okay, so that's what I have written here. There is an exponentially small scattering length. Exponentially small transition temperature, and on the BEC side, I have a collection of bosons, and the bosons interact by a scattering length which is twice the scattering length of the fermions. Okay, that's the interaction between the bosons, and the TC of the system is about something like 20% of TF. Okay, so now let me put on these non-abelian gauge fields. And the kind of non-abelian gauge fields that one generates in the laboratory is where they are uniform. That is, these objects are not spatially dependent. And they are also of this form in the sense that they are diagonal in each direction, if you like. Okay, so that's the form of that. And if you work out what this actually means for the set of lambdas that I have written here, it results in a generalized spin-orbit coupling. So this was the kinetic energy of the fermions before I had the gauge field. The gauge field just gives me this term, where there is a lambda x sigma x coupling in the x direction, lambda y sigma y in the y direction, and so on. So it gives me a generalized Rashba spin-orbit coupling. So the spin-orbit coupling or this gauge field is actually described by a vector in this lambda space. And there are some specific kind of gauge fields that we are interested in. So for example, if there is only one coupling only in one direction, we call it the prolate gauge field. And if there is coupling in all three directions in an equal way, we call it the spherical gauge field. And if I have coupling in two directions, we call it the oblate gauge field. And this is what is traditionally in condensed matter called as the Rashba spin-orbit coupling. Okay, that's the background. So what do the one-particle states look like when I have this kind of spin-orbit coupling? So what I'm showing you here is that, okay, so the energies, eigenstates of the one-particle system are momentum states multiplied by helicity states. What are these helicity states? Since there is spin-orbit coupling, the spin gets locked to the momentum. So in some sense, you can say that there are two possible states when the spin is parallel to the momentum. That's the low energy state, the plus helicity state, and that has a dispersion like this. And you see that there is a minimum here, not at the origin. And if I have minus helicity states, where the spin points opposite direction of momentum, I have a dispersion that goes off like that. Right? That's the dispersion. Okay, and then I have this contact interaction, which I had discussed prior to this. Okay, now this is the central question that we are going to address. Okay, I give you a fermion with a collection of fermions with this density. I give you a spin orbit coupling lambda in the space. I'll give you some vector, and then my question is, this is the phase diagram I showed you when lambda was 0. That was my second transparency. And the question is, what is the phase diagram in this along this axis? What happens when I increase lambda? That's the question of my talk. Okay, all right. So I'm going to organize my presentation in this way. I'll first discuss ground state, excitations, and I'll give you the phase diagram. And if I have some time left, which I certainly will not, I will try to discuss. I'll at least try to show you some of these things. Okay, this is a technical slide, so let me skip it. Okay, so let me tell you let me start telling you the answers. So let's start with the two-body problem. So if I have this prolate gauge field where there's this gauge coupling in only one direction, the energetics of bound state formation is identical to what we had in free vacuum. Free vacuum meaning when there was no gauge field. Okay, there's no bound state for negative scattering length. There's a bound state for positive scattering length, and the binding energy goes as 1 over scattering length square. The interesting thing that comes up here is that there is also a triplet piece for the wave function, but this is not surprising because there's spin orbit coupling, and total angular momentum is a good quantum number, but spin angular momentum is not. Okay, and there are some connections to helium-3 and all, which I will not get into because I don't have the time for that. Okay, now here's the first interesting result. So suppose I go to this, what we call as the Rashba gauge field, where I have gauge coupling in two directions. The first interesting thing that happens is that I get a bound state for any scattering length for two particles in 3 spatial dimensions. Okay, and one can pull off the results. So this looks like some exponentially weakly bound state, and this is the usual result. And this is the result at infinite scattering length. So I get a bound state there. And again, it has some spin nematic structure and so on, the bound state. Okay, let me go to the spherical gauge field. Here again, you see that you get a bound state for any scattering length. And look at this. We can actually do this. We meaning Jayant can actually pull off an analytical result like this. And what you see is that the binding energy is quadratic in scattering length for small negative scattering length. So it's very strongly bound, even if the scattering length is very small negative number. That's the point. Okay, so you generate strong binding. So now what I'm doing is I'm plotting the critical scattering length required to form a bound state. Remember, if I had free vacuum, that is infinity, right? And this is a plot of that, and you see that anywhere on the surface, this is actually a plot phi theta are the angles on this. Anywhere on the surface, it's negative. So what is the meaning of that? The spin orbit coupling of this non-abelian gauge field, it is acting as some kind of amplifier of attractive interactions. That's what it's doing. So why is that the case? Okay, and of course you will see that there is a special point where the scattering length diverges, that is that, and there the bound state is everything is determined by lambda, and I'll come back to this later. So why is that the case? Well, if you do some simple scaling arguments, you can see that this Rashba operator which I wrote down, it is relevant at both these fixed points. So we know something has to happen. The question is what happens and why do we see what we see? So the answer to that is actually comes from elementary physics. So what one does is one looks at the density of states associated with these two particles, and one sees that suppose I look at these three different gauge fields, the prolate gauge field where I had gauge coupling only in one direction, and oblate gauge field where I had gauge coupling in two directions. The first one has square root E density of states, which is the usual one. And when I go to the oblate gauge field, I see that I get a finite density of states. And then when I go to the spherical one, I get a density of states which goes as 1 over square root of energy. Now why does this happen? It's very simple. So suppose I take the spherical gauge field, I have the lowest energy state for one particle occurs at k equal to lambda, and the sphere, the entire sphere at k equal to lambda is the lowest energy state. So there's a lot of degeneracy for the ground state of the one particle system, and that goes into two particle degeneracy of two particle states as well. So the density of states of these two particles to form bound state is actually determined by the co-dimension of the ground state of the one particle manifold. So now if you look here, for the spherical case, the ground state of the one particle system is a sphere, so its co-dimension is 1, so the density of states looks like a 1D system. Okay, and that's why you get this very strong enhanced binding. Okay, you can actually take this and put it into some model and show that it all works out very nicely and so on. Okay, so now I have described the two particle problem. I need to go to the many body system. Okay, so first let me discuss the many body system without interactions. So I'm going to discuss what happens to the many body system when I don't have interactions. So of course I have density of fermions which is kf cubed, which is by definition kf cubed. So if I have small lambda small compared to kf, I see that my chemical potential goes as 1 minus lambda by kf square. Now if I go to large lambda much greater than kf, I see that it changes the functional form changes. So what that means is something has to give en route when going from lambda small to lambda big. And what actually happens is that there is actually a change in the topology of the Fermi surface. So you start with, actually there are two overlapping hemispheres here. There's a blue hemisphere and a red hemisphere, and they correspond to the different spins. As I increase lambda, you see that the Fermi surface of the blue system increases in size, changes its shape, and this is the plus helicity states which are lower in energy. And the Fermi surface of the other guys, that's sort of shrinking. Right? And as I keep increasing lambda with the same fixed density, a critical lambda appears at which all the minus helicity states are thrown out, and I have only plus helicity states, and I get a torus as the Fermi surface of the system. Okay? And so on. And for whatever it's worth, let me try to see whether I can run a movie to show you this. Okay, so you can, I'm increasing lambda and bringing it back. I'm increasing lambda and I'll do it one more time. I thought I had looped it, but okay. Okay, so there's a topology change of the Fermi surface, you can see that. Okay, that's what happens. Okay, so other than a curiosity, what interesting consequences does this have? Let me show you, it has very significant and interesting consequences. Function f phi, no. Sorry about that. Oops. Okay. Okay, let me just work with this. Okay, so that's what happens. Okay, now so this is all for non-interacting system. Let me turn on the interactions. Okay, so this is one of the key slides of my talk. So let me start with a scattering length for which in the absence of this any gauge field of any kind, the ground state is a BCS superfluid with very large pairs. Okay. Now the question that I'm going to ask is, I'm going to fix the scattering length at whatever value. In this case, it's a very small negative value here. And then I'm going to increase lambda, okay? And here I'm showing you several plots. So let me discuss the chemical potential. There are three curves shown here. there is the chemical potential of the non-interacting system, which I had shown in the previous transparency, and that's this, the green line. Then there is the energy of the two-body bound state that I had shown you in the previous part of my talk, and that is this. So you see what happens. When lambda is small, my chemical potential is more or less determined by the non-interacting system, so I have the usual BCS state. As I increase lambda, I switch over from this non-interacting kind of state, the chemical potential determined by the non-interacting state, to the chemical potential switches over to the energy set by the two-body problem. What this means is that there is some kind of crossover to some BEC kind of state, okay, where the chemical potential is determined by the energy of the boson that's forming, okay. And what happens is, whatever scattering length you start off with, the system will flow to this Rashband condensate, okay. So that's the main story. Okay, now why do we get these Rashbands? Well, one can make this argument in some way, but since I'm running out of time, please ask me later. You can sort of understand this in this RG picture. There's some fixed point here and everything flows to that. Okay, let me just give you, that is the short version of the answer. So this is the main sort of results. So for two particles, you get bound state for any scattering length, and for many body, this spin-orbit coupling can induce a BC crossover at a fixed attractive interaction, and the BEC obtained at large scattering length, at large spin-orbit coupling is the condensate of these Rashbands. Okay, now I should discuss what are the excitations of the system and what are the properties of this Rashband condensate. Okay, so let me first discuss the excitations of two particles. So we know that excitations at when the total center of mass moment of the particle is 0, that's the bound state that forms. Okay, so if I have the excitations will be that I take this pair and accelerate it, so it picks up a finite center of mass momentum. So I need to find the energy of this bound state as a function of the center of mass momentum. Okay, so here's a plot of the dispersion of this bound state as a function of the center of mass momentum. So you see, when lambda was 0, for say, let's say I had this negative 1/2 scattering length, I will see that there is some bound state at some finite depth. Now as I increase lambda, you see that the bound state disappears. So this will not happen for the usual system, because whatever be the center of mass momentum of the two fermions that I had, the binding energy will be the same because the system has Galilean invariance. Okay, all right. So actually this system does not have Galilean invariance. So what actually happens is that the binding energy of the boson that forms, the pair that forms, is dependent on the center of mass momentum. But here's the remarkable thing: when I go to center of mass momentum that are greater than lambda, even for a positive scattering length, I do not have a bound state. So what was actually helping me to form bound state at 0 center of mass momentum is actually, it's hindering bound state formation at large center of mass momentum. So it's exactly opposite. So why does that happen? That happens for the following reason, that again, I mentioned that there's no Galilean invariance. So if you go to the Galilean boosted frame, this is Jayan's argument, what you see is that you will actually pick up a Zeeman field in the Galilean boosted frame. So what happens is you have a pair, the pair has a Zeeman field, so that splits out the binding, and that's why you kill the bound state. Okay, so what consequences does this have? Okay, suppose we go to a large lambda limit, we can actually study the properties of this Rashband condensate by looking at the mass of these Rashbands. So for example, for small q, I can write this expansion, I can pick up the mass of these Rashbands, and you will find that the mass of these Rashbands are roughly twice the mass of the fermions that went in. Right? That's what is shown here. For if I go along this line, that's what I'll get. Okay. So now this turns out to be very lucky and hopefully very useful in the future. Okay, I'll tell you why that's the case in a minute. Okay, let's look at the excitations of the mini-body system. So if I have the a superfluid ground state, the excitations are either the phase mode or the amplitude mode. So let's look at those. I'll skip the Bogoliubov particles. Okay. So what I have is this is a plot of the phase stiffness divided by the phase stiffness of the system without any spin orbit coupling, and that because when I don't have spin orbit coupling, I have Galilean invariance. This phase stiffness is determined by the density of the particles by 4 times mass, and this is Leggett's theorem actually. That's the Galilean invariance forces the superfluid stiffness to be the density of the particles. Okay, now if I increase lambda, you see that the phase stiffness goes away from that value, And that's not surprising because system does not have Galilean invariance, and that was actually pointed out by these authors. So we showed a new result, which is the following. If you go to very large lambda, lambda much greater than kf, you actually have a new Galilean invariance emerges in the system. And what happens is that the phase stiffness actually goes as density of Rasch bonds, which is actually density of fermions divided by 2, multiplied by the mass of the Rasch bonds. Okay, so this is actually an analytical result. Okay, what this means is that the Rasch bonds must be interacting, because if I didn't have the Rasch bonds interacting, my BC would not have any phase stiffness. So what is the interactions between the Rasch bonds? Okay, so we can do all those calculations, and here's the result. This is the scattering length between the Rasch bonds. And what you see is that the scattering length between the Rasch bonds is determined only by lambda, only by the spin orbit coupling. It's not determined by the scattering length between the fermions. So I just need a non-zero scattering length. They will form a bound state. They will form these Rasch bond, and the Rasch bonds will interact with each other by an interaction which is determined only by the spin orbit coupling. Okay, and that's what happens. That's the result. Okay. So I don't know many states in condensed matter where this happens, where the interactions between the emergent particles would be independent of the interactions of the constituents and so on. Okay. 5 minutes, yeah. I should be able to do it. Okay. All right. Okay. So there's an explanation as to why that's the case. Let me skip that since I don't have time. Okay. So this is, now I have to show you the full phase diagram, including the temperature axis. And here's the, let me skip that too. Okay, here's a phase diagram. So this is the picture I stated as my question. This was the original result, the BCS to BEC crossover at lambda equal to 0. And here's my answer after having done some detailed calculations. So I start with an exponentially small transition temperature at weak attractive interaction. I increase lambda, and I jack it up all the way to order TF. So the TC there is something like 0.2 TF with weak attractive interaction. Okay, so it's a way to generate hot superfluids, right, with weak attractive interactions and no correlations. Okay, and now why is this 0.2 TF? Because the TC of this thing is determined only by the mass of the Rasch bonds, which luckily for us is roughly twice the fermion mass, and that's why it's of order TF. If it were 20 times fermion mass, then it would have been down by a factor, at least an order of magnitude. Okay, so that's the result, and again so this is actually a BEC to Rasch bond BEC crossover, and this resonance scattering length is nothing special now. It evolves to the same Rasch bond condensate. So what we have shown here is that whatever you start off with, if you reach large lambda, the BEC that you obtain is the same BEC. It's the same Rasch bond that you will get, and the Rasch bond is actually determined only by the lambda, the spin orbit coupling. And whatever scattering length you start off with, it will flow to this. That's the RG picture actually. Okay, all right. So this is the phase diagram. So you can also show that there will be a very big pseudo gap regime here, and you can understand that simply from the two particle dispersion. Because if I'm at a temperature where lambda, Kf, and Tf, lambda, Tf, and the density scale all are comparable, then you see I will accelerate my Rasch bonds to this center of mass momentum simply by thermal excitations, and they'll break up. So I'll have a soup of these bound particles at low momenta and these broken fermions at high momenta, and that will give me the pseudo gap kind of signatures. Okay, so I'll take one more minute, Diptaman, if you allow me. Okay. So I just want to point out one more little thing. This has got nothing to do with interactions, and actually has nothing to do with fermions themselves. And it's a way of using the spin orbit coupling or this kind of non-abelian gauge fields along with other potentials to generate new kind of Hamiltonians which can actually support topological states. Okay, so here's the simplest example of it. Let me just actually go straight to the example. Okay, so this is I have my spherical gauge field now. I just put on my spherical gauge field. So this is the kinetic energy and this is the gauge coupling. And then I just put a quadratic potential. This is very easy to do in cold atoms. And what I do is I work in the limit omega naught as an energy scale is much smaller than the energy scale determined by lambda. Okay, so lambda is the spin orbit coupling is the largest energy scale in the probe. Okay, now I can take this model and write this in momentum representation. So the position will take the role of this object. The kinetic energy in momentum space is actually the potential, and that's what I see here. Now since this omega naught is much smaller than lambda, I can do some kind of adiabatic assumption here. And I can work out the theory of that, and the general result will give you this. And what you will find is that you will find that this particle, which is now has a locked helicity, which I have written as the plus helicity, picks up a new gauge field, right? A new gauge field emerges. And for the spherical gauge field, that I have applied, the emergent gauge field corresponds to that of a magnetic monopole. So actually I can use these things to generate things like monopole fields. And the unique thing about this is that this is a monopole field in momentum space. Right? So when I go to large lambda, this thing, this potential term will lock all the particles to have magnitude of momentum to be equal to lambda. So it will be as if that all my particles in momentum space are getting locked at lambda, and there is a monopole at the origin there. Now if I put in various particle fields, etc., I can try to generate some kind of spherical geometry, quantum Hall state, etc. Okay, so we have Antoine talked about Feshbach resonance. We have actually worked out the theory of Feshbach resonance in this and so on. I just want to point out that our theory matches with experiments from NIST. Okay, we have predicted that there's finite momentum pairing and so on. Okay, so this is a summary of my talk. So in non-abelian gauge fields, fermions will form bound states for arbitrarily small attractive interaction. You can have new kinds of BCS-BEC crossover. You can have a new kind of condensate called the Rashomon condensate, which has a very high transition temperature. This has very interesting sort of nice properties in that there's an emergent Galilean invariant. There is a nice new state where the interaction between the emergent particles is independent of the interactions between the constituents. You have opportunities to generate new kinds of Hamiltonians. You have full Ferrel states. We have studied Feshbach resonance. And if you want to have one picture to take home, and that's the one that I will recommend. Okay, thank you very much. I always give very clear talks.
Yeah. So what about these other geometries? I mean, this Rashba thing corresponded to this oblate thing.
No. That's what we simply call as Rashba, but we use the word Rashba for any one of these. Okay. Yeah. So we just call them, we just call them Rashba because it's generalization of Rashba's Hamiltonian to any coupling. Sorry, I think I've overshot this. Right. So this any of these things we call as Rashba, right? So what is conventionally called in condensed matter as Rashba is when lambda z is 0 and you have only lambda x, lambda y. So the spin texture is but that's one example. We have generalized it to have 3 dimensions and so on. So there are actually proposals to generate these things and so on. They need many lasers, so it's not going to happen very quickly. So yes, there's a question.
The strength of lambda where the Rashomon
yeah.
fluid state occurs at high temperature can be realized in the lab?
That's a great question. So what is the important parameter? The important parameter is lambda by kf. So I need to have, with the current system, I need to have something like 100,000 to 500,000 particles to realize that. That's okay. It's okay, but it's pushing the that's doable. So the answer is it's doable. So the Rashomons will occur at when lambda by kf is of order 2 or 2.5 or 3 or something like that. Yeah. So it's doable.
So my question goes also in this direction. Up to now, you are thinking all the time about optical lattice, more in this direction to realize this kind of Rashomons. But
yeah.
For instance, we have in solid state, if we think about systems where these Rashba effects may be important, is for instance topological insulators, have you thought about these kind of effects maybe being possible in these systems?
Absolutely, yeah. So one of these things, we had a visitor, Sumilan Banerjee, and he works on these interfaces which Didier was talking about and those class of problems. Their lambda by kf, they have very high spin orbit coupling in those systems. That is of something like order 0.2. So it's too small for our. So now the thing is, can we engineer materials where we can actually enhance this to push this to maybe an order of magnitude higher? Very small Fermi surface will be susceptible to disorder and all that. Okay, that's if, okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, but I would have thought that that will be in the, on the band tails and they will get localized, just usual localization.
They are very, very nice.
They're so clean that you don't have any disorder?
Very short quantum
Oh,
oscillation.
okay.
Very small time
Okay.
surfaces that exist.
Okay,
They are quite fascinating.
okay, we can talk about that. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Okay, if not, let's thank
Okay,
the
thank
speaker
you.
again. Do you have any announcements?